The gates of Orléans were on the verge of collapse. English cannons had pounded the city for months. Supplies were thinning. Morale was gone. Inside the walls, people were already whispering about surrender. And then, a teenage girl rode in. She carried no noble title, no military rank, no battlefield experience. She claimed only one thing, that God had sent her to save France. Here's the unsettling part. Within days, the momentum of a war that had dragged on for nearly a century began to shift. Not because of a new weapon, not because of reinforcements, but because a 17-year-old refused to accept that defeat was inevitable. This is Infinite Turning Points, where we explore the moments that quietly, or suddenly, changed the course of history. Today's story isn't just about the rise and fall of Joan of Arc. It's about how one unlikely figure altered the psychology of a collapsing kingdom and forced a war back into motion. Because before Joan appeared, France was losing the 100 Years' War, and after she entered it, the trajectory changed. Not overnight, but irreversibly. By the late 1420s, France was fractured. The English controlled large swaths of the north. Paris was in English hands. The Burgundians, French in language and culture, were allied with England. The French crown itself was in crisis. The man who claimed to be king, Charles VII, wasn't even crowned yet. Why does that matter? Because in medieval France, legitimacy wasn't symbolic, it was structural. A king had to be crowned at Reims Cathedral to be recognized as divinely sanctioned, and Reims was deep in enemy territory. So Charles was a king without a crown, a ruler without authority. And here's what most people don't realize. Many in France believed the English claim to the throne might actually win. The war had dragged on for generations. Defeat felt permanent. Orléans was the key. If the English captured it, they would control the Loire River and effectively split southern France from the rest. It wasn't just a city, it was a hinge. Lose Orléans, and resistance collapses. Hold it, and there's still a chance. By early 1429, that chance looked slim. French commanders were cautious, defensive, predictable, and morale was broken. That's the state Joan entered. Joan was born in a small village called Domrémy. She wasn't trained in warfare. She couldn't read or write. But at age 13, she claimed to hear divine voices, Saints Michael, Catherine, and Margaret, telling her she had a mission to drive out the English and ensure Charles was crowned. Now you might think medieval France was simply gullible, but this is where context matters. France was steeped in religious belief. Visions weren't unusual. What made Joan different wasn't the claim. It was the certainty. She didn't ask to join the army. She demanded to lead it. After months of persistence and surprisingly thorough theological questioning, she was granted an audience with Charles. And somehow she convinced him. That decision changed everything. In April 1429, Joan entered Orléans. She didn't command strategy in the modern sense. Experienced generals still made tactical decisions, but she changed the tempo. She pushed for aggressive action. She insisted on attacking English fortifications. She refused to accept defensive stagnation. Within days, French forces began retaking key positions around the city. On May 8th, the English lifted the siege. Orléans was saved. For the first time in years, the French had a clear, undeniable victory, and this single moment had consequences no one could undo. Here's what most people miss. Joan's impact wasn't purely military. It was psychological. For decades, the French had fought reactively. Now they fought with conviction. Victories followed at Patay and along the Loire. The road to Reims, once considered impossible, was suddenly viable. And in July 1429, Charles was crowned king in Reims Cathedral. Joan stood beside him. That coronation was the turning point. Because legitimacy isn't just ceremony, it's authority made visible. But success created new tension. Once Charles was crowned, Joan's utility became politically complicated. She was unpredictable, independent, driven by divine conviction rather than courtly caution, and France's leadership preferred negotiation over reckless advance. In 1430, Joan was captured by Burgundian forces and sold to the English. What followed wasn't just imprisonment. It was a trial, not for treason against England, but for heresy. The charge was theological, because if her visions were false, her legitimacy evaporated. And if her legitimacy evaporated, so did the narrative of divine support for Charles. The trial was meticulously documented. Joan defended herself with intelligence and clarity that stunned her interrogators. She navigated theological traps. She resisted intimidation. But the outcome was predetermined. In 1431, at age 19, she was burned at the stake in Rouen. Now you might assume her death reversed everything. It didn't. In fact, it amplified her influence. After Joan's execution, the war didn't collapse back into English dominance. Instead, France continued to consolidate. Over the next 2 decades, the French gradually retook territory. By 1453, the 100 Years' War effectively ended, with England retaining only Calais. Joan didn't win the war single-handedly, but she reversed its momentum. And momentum in war is everything. Imagine pushing a stalled cart up a hill. You don't need to carry it to the top. You just need to get it moving again. Joan got France moving. The consequences were massive. A unified French monarchy emerged stronger than before. England, having lost its continental ambitions, turned inward, reshaping its own political evolution. The idea of national identity deepened on both sides of the Channel. Joan herself became something else entirely. A symbol of resistance, of faith, of national destiny. Centuries later, she would be canonized as a saint, but her historical significance isn't mystical, it's structural. She proved that belief, strategically deployed, can alter the course of a war. Joan of Arc didn't introduce new weapons. She didn't invent new tactics. She altered confidence. And confidence changes decision-making. Decision-making changes outcomes. Outcomes change history. Her presence forced leaders to act boldly when caution had become habit, and that shift in mindset reversed a losing war. When Joan rode into Orléans, France was preparing to endure defeat. When she died, France was on a path to victory. She didn't live to see it completed. But history doesn't require survival to validate impact. It requires inflection. And Joan of Arc was one. A 17-year-old who stepped into a collapsing kingdom and made it believe again. If you want to understand how the world we live in was shaped, one decision at a time, subscribe to Infinite Turning Points.